Hello.
There we are.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. Brianna, do you want to kick things off?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as we wait for our participants to join in and everyone to get settled, I have a couple of quick, fun kickoff questions for our group here. Let's make this a little engaging and exciting. So, I'll start with Richard. What's your favorite
Mhm.
travel destination?
I would have to say it's Stockholm,
Oh,
Sweden.
is
Yeah.
there any particular reason why?
It's a beautiful place to visit. They basically redid the entire city except for the middle. There's a city like in the middle of an island, and the rest of the city has been redone. LEED certification, green buildings, like they redid everything. And then the center of the city, which is a little island, has buildings from like the 1100s, the 1200s. Like they didn't touch it. And so it's a mix of old and new, and it'll stay light there in the summer till like 10 o'clock at night. So it's a beautiful city to visit.
Perfect combination. What about you, Andreas?
Yeah, so my favorite destination to travel to is Aruba. Um,
Oh,
yes, and not for any of the reasons that Richard mentioned. Like, I'm just more of like I like to lounge around and really enjoy the beach and have a nice cocktail in my hand and look at the beautiful scenery. So that's where I'd love to go.
Same here. I'm a beach bum, water baby. Give me a cocktail, beautiful, just fine grain sand and crystal clear
Yes.
water. Thailand is mine. Phuket, yes, take me there any day, all day. How about you, Anne? Favorite travel destination? Did we lose her? We
oh,
lost
we
her.
lost her.
Okay. Well, let's jump into the next question.
Mhm.
Most memorable pride related experience. Let's try Anne again. I see her here. Let's see if we can hear from her. No,
I
technical.
think Anne is having, yeah, some technical difficulties, unfortunately. But let's move on. Let's move to the next panelist.
Sounds good. Andres, I will push it back over to you.
Yeah, so two actually come to mind. The first one was my first Pride, which I actually went with my sister. She was working for an organization that was a sponsor of the Pride Parade in the DC area, and so I got to join her and her company in the Pride Parade, and it was like I think it was may have been either before or right after I had come out when it happened. So like it was one of those opportunities for me to see my people before I was even comfortable seeing myself at that point. And then the second one would be the first Pride that I went with my partner. And it was a nice experience because our birthdays both fall in June. So it's like we had so many celebrations that month, celebrations of our queerness, celebrations of our birth, celebrations of our first, like our relationships. So lots of things to celebrate Pride Month.
I love that. I love that. What about you, Richard?
I'd have to say my favorite memory was 2015. And if you look back at your history in the LGBTQIA community, that was when marriage was legalized,
Yes.
and it coincided in San Francisco with like the very start of Pride that year. And I got to see a really good friend of mine who I knew from college get married at the steps of City Hall.
Yep. Oh,
And I if I would have looked back at the years when we were in school together, he would have said this will never happen. There's no way. And then there I was, right at the start of Pride, watching a great friend tie the knot. So it was really cool, and to see families there, and that was the kickoff for like the whole week of festivities. It was just a magical, amazing time in San Francisco then, and it was unforgettable.
That's really beautiful. Mine is not quite as magical as yours is, but it definitely, Andreas, we have similar experiences. I volunteered with Pride Houston. I'm in Houston, and got to be on their float, throwing out all the swag and fun stuff, and walking with them, and really experiencing this heartwarming, joyful experience of being with my people, right? And seeing people kind of just shouting from the crowds, excited, just wearing their colors. And I remember being in high school, kind of just loud and proud. I'm wearing like the rainbow suspenders and like, just the geek and nerding out over just, I don't care what anyone has to say. I'm going to be who I am and you're going to deal with it in your own way. And if it's a problem, forget about me. So I will hand it back over to Eduardo so he can get us kicked off and we'll get it started.
Thank you very much, Brianna. This was fun. Let's get it started. My name is Eduardo. I am a community events manager at Modern Sales Pros and your host for the next hour. Today, we are here to talk about queer voices in sales in all related disciplines. With this awesome panelists here, we unfortunately missed Anne. Anne is having some emergencies, so she was traveling and tried to log in. Thank you, Anne, for trying to log in, but she wasn't able to stay. So I'm sorry for that. But I'm sure that Andres and Richard and Brianna will be awesome, and you're going to get so much information from them. And the takeaways will be amazing. So this event is hosted by MSP, and for those of you not familiar with Modern Sales Pros, we are the world's largest and highest quality community for those in sales, sales management, sales leadership, sales and revenue operations, and sales enablement, aka our Modern Sales Pros. Our mission is to create an environment for our members to answer questions they would struggle to solve on their own and to help them see around corners they might not know about. And we do that through live sessions like this one you're about to experience. We have a robust online forum, and we have our quarterly summits. And we are starting to get back to in-person events. I just hosted an in-person event yesterday, and it was really fun. And if you're not already part of the MSP, you'll be invited to join after this event. And if you like this content, and I'm sure you will, we are organizing a 3-day Revenue Excellence Summit happening July 12th through the 14th. We pulled together 16 events of amazing content and speakers like CEO from Zoom Info, Sales Loft, Clary, and Winning by Design, as well as sales leaders at HubSpot, Dooley, Outreach, Atrium, and much, much more. So please use the link in the chat. I think my coworker Janisha is putting the link right there for you to register and to enjoy all this amazing content. But that's enough. Let's go jump into the session. But before, I have some housekeeping notes for you. I am so excited to dive in, but I want to remind everyone that this event is being recorded and it will possibly be available in the MSP previous events page. After the event, we're going to send you a follow-up email with links and information. So don't worry, you can. Please take a lot of notes. I will be taking a lot of notes, but the recording will be available for you later on. And second, if you have questions, and while I was backstage with the speakers, they were like asking me if people ask questions because they love questions. So let's make their Pride Month even happier and shower them with questions using the Q&A tab right there, or you can put your questions in the chat too. I'll make sure they will get to your questions as soon as possible. And that is it from me. I'm gonna pass it back to Brianna again, and then we can kick this amazing conversation. I'll be back in the end for some outro and to get the key takeaways from our panelists. Brianna, we are so excited to start this. Please take the lead and let's have some fun.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So I am Brianna Yarbrough, co-founder of C Model, which is an on-demand analyst for small businesses and small to medium-sized businesses that allows you to have insight into your revenue intelligence, not just a summarized view from your CRM that you're looking at dashboards and still trying to strategize, but actually giving you contextual details so that you know what next steps to take from a strategic and a tactical standpoint. Richard, could you tell us a little bit about who you are and where you work and what you do?
Sure. Thanks, Brianna. I'm really excited to be on the panel. Rich Park, I'm the Vice President of Commercial Sales for a company called ThoughtSpot. It's a BI analytics SaaS software company, and I'm based out of Dallas, Fort Worth, and San Diego.
Love it. Andres?
Yeah. So, hi, everyone. I'm Andres Peters. I'm the Chief Learning Officer and a Senior Sales Trainer with Maestro Group, which is a sales accelerator company that works with many organizations to help them sell more faster. And I do that specifically through training, coaching, and also creating onboarding programs for new hires that join sales organizations. As you've heard with the Great Resignation, there's so much turnover happening now, and it's, how do you give them that experience that doesn't make them want to leave?
That's absolutely right. Thank you so much for your intros. So every June, we now have Pride Month, thanks to Bill Clinton, who initially in 1999 made June Pride Month. And so very excited to be here and be able to celebrate this over and over again over the last, decade to 2 decades now. Oh my gosh, time is flying. But coming together in harmony and really educating each other and thinking about what it's like to work in an environment or even tech space is something that, we as individuals have to think about. Do we come out and share, oh, my partner's actually a woman, when we're asked the question of, hey, do you have a boyfriend? Or being very open to, recognizing and being transparent about who we are and being vulnerable and, willing to share that, hey, our identities are queer and we want to do more. And there's a lot of sales. I think there's a lot of opportunity in the sales area to kind of think about this in a more strategic way. And so that's what this conversation is really about today. And I'd love to start off by hearing a little bit about the stories and journeys of each of our careers that have led us to where we are today and how it has transformed. Because I have pinpointed places where I just wasn't comfortable being myself. And I can imagine that it resonates with other people that identify as queer as well. And so how about we start off with Andres? Can you tell me a little bit about your story? Share, your journey, where have you been? What have you done? What sort of industries have you worked through? And what sort of challenges have you faced throughout your career?
Yeah. So, interestingly, I actually did not start in sales. I started in consulting, but really doing like financial statement audits. So like very different. I did that for a few years, realized that wasn't my passion area, and transitioned into a role into learning and development, where I focused on leadership training, on promotion training, sales training, and onboarding. And, my journey, luckily for me, I never really experienced any sort of discrimination or anything that made me not feel like I could be my authentic self at work. That said, though, moving into sales or moving into a more sales specific role, I definitely have started to feel that I'm operating in a space where in a space that was both designed for me, but also not designed for me. And what I mean by that is, with my different identities as identifying as a cisgender man, but also identifying as LGBTQ as well as Latinx, there are certain aspects of the sales role that were designed specifically for different parts of those identities. And some of the challenges that I faced is, not many people know this, but I actually work for my brother. He started this organization and I joined him to help build some generational wealth. So future generations of our family, we're both first generation college students and have worked, many different jobs and want to pave the way for our next generations. We never lead with the fact that we're related, but when people get to know that we're related, when I got married, I took my partner's last name. And when they find out that we get married, the first question or the first reaction is always, but you have different last names. And, I'm usually to me, like, that question doesn't really bother me, but it's almost in a way like I have to out myself twice to that individual, not only as someone as a professional, but someone who's married to a man. If I'm not comfortable sharing that with a particular client, I kind of have to share that at that point. But it's just one of those things where, there's so much bias, or so many things that, that for some people are norms for them, like understanding having a different last name than us if you're a woman that's married to a man, or anyone who changes their last name like that. So for me, it's one of those things where I constantly have to battle that, and I always have to think about those two different identities, or those very different identities that I have to balance day in and day out. If I'm not being direct enough because I'm more empathetic, or if I culturally speaking, if I need more context in certain things versus other things, while sales is like quick direct, sometimes I need to take a step back and really lean into something or really understand something before I move forward.
Absolutely. This is a completely safe space. And I think that you touched on something that I want to kind of circle back and to specify. I understand that we likely have participants or attendees that are not queer, and this is their opportunity to learn the diverse perspectives of what it's like to be queer in sales, and learn how to be an ally. And so that sort of situation that you just spoke up about is kind of one of those situations where you don't quite know where there are boundaries, and boundaries exist. And so in order to be an ally, you have to recognize that some things are not appropriate for you to ask. I have a great example. I am married and I have a 3-year-old son, and they're like, how did you do that? Did you lay with a man? What did you do? And I'm like, that's not appropriate. Don't ask me that question. It is not for you to know. But then we also have attendees that are here. They're queer and they're proud. And I'm just excited for you to be here, join us in celebrating in all of the successes that we've made. I mean, there's been a lot of progress and a lot of history over time. Before we got started, I mentioned Stonewall riots. That was back in 1969. There was prostitution just to be able to survive, because no one would hire trans, people that identify in the transsexual sort of identity, because of the way that they looked, and they were mistreated as such. And there's a lot of hurt and pain that resonates with the LGBTQ plus sort of identity. So from you, Rich, I'd love to hear your story. What brings you here with us today? How did it kind of evolve, and what sort of challenges did you face?
I think the start of my career, right, being in the Bay Area, being in San Francisco and starting to work, I started in sales, and then I went into consulting to work with sales organizations. I always felt like the first maybe like 5 to 7 years of my career after college, I was really lucky because I was in San Francisco, right? And to me, it was normal to have queer managers, to have trans clients, of every spectrum. Like it never felt like anything was unusual. And it wasn't until I, stepped out of that and spent more time in different industries and with different geographies outside of the Bay Area, you begin to see like the struggle is so real. And everything you read about, the outright, the violence, the struggling, the treatment of anyone on the spectrum who's queer and different, no matter what it is, it's real. It's real. And, I think back to my early mentors, right? And when they started to tell me about what they had gone through, being in the closet for a long time, I began to really, really pay attention really to leadership. And I think it was when I understood that leadership is a calling for a lot of people, and it's a powerful platform, that what you really should do in most organizations, yes, you have to pursue the goals of the organization. You have to, in sales, you have to achieve revenue. You have all these other goals, but ultimately, an organization is also about the people in it and the people that we serve, and our communities are diverse, and leadership, it's about paying attention to that. And I think for me, the journey has always just been about understanding the importance and the obligation of having a platform like this, and having people who feel isolated to know that, hey, they're not alone. I saw a stat recently that something like close to 35-40% of like North America corporate employees are who identify as LGBTQIA are closeted, meaning they haven't expressed who they are, and that's really sad. That's a large chunk of the workforce. And when you start to look at that and you look deeper at the numbers from the statistics, um, 75% of people who have come out, who've said, "I'm proud of who I am, I'm queer, I'm different," have experienced anywhere from 1 to 10 negative experiences, meaning everything from outright, violence and derision, all the way through to just somebody excluding them, and they're all hurtful and negative. And back to what I said about leadership, I know we're going to talk about it, but I think for me, the journey has always been to shine a light on that and help all people who feel different to just know, hey, there's a place for you, no matter what you are. And sales is about being bold. It's about stepping over your fears. And I think it's a great profession for people who want to be who they are and want to address that. And I think the more we have that, the better of a sales professional you are, because it's about authenticity. And I think that's key to it. So I'm hoping that people who are watching this, who maybe still are closeted and still are in fear, like you're not alone. Reach out, and there's a voice, there's a place for you. And for all the leaders who are listening, it's our job to make work a safe place and to make work a place where people can do their very best. And one more stat, like my favorite stat, it comes from a study by Boston Consulting Group. They said that employees who have an active leadership culture that gives them safety and gives them the room to be who they are, meaning like letting them be out and letting them thrive, they're 1.5 to 3 times more productive and creative in the workplace. Like, what other business statistic is there to be the calling that every leader has to create that environment? So I think, just to wrap up, I was lucky. I had that early in my career, and I had great, brave leaders who did that. And I just think all of us should. It's a platform. So anybody who wants to be in leadership and management, it's not just about the numbers and what you want to achieve. You got to be a cultural leader, especially if you are queer, especially if you are in the community. You got to come out. You got to be brave. You got to do it for all those other people who are going to come after you, who meaning after your time in leadership, who need your courage and they need your voice, because they're quiet and on the sidelines, and that just doesn't work.
That's absolutely right. I am 100% with you on that. Inclusion matters and representation matters so deeply, because there are always people that are in the organization or on LinkedIn that are watching, and they don't know how to move, or they're afraid to navigate things because they don't want to make the wrong decision. They don't want to misstep. I was one of those people. I started out my career, I'm in Houston, Texas, and Houston, Texas is known for you kind of being funneled into the oil and gas industry, highly political. I suppressed and hid who I was, the non-visible portion of my identity, because there is a visible portion of my identity, my intersectionality. Clearly, I am a Black female. And so I was in fear of being judged even more than I felt like I already had been, and mistreated, because there were things that were not visible that also made me an outlier, or made me a target to be excluded. And so 100% agree. It is a top-down initiative. If your leadership, your CEO and your C-suite, your board, your investors even are not on the same page when it comes down to culture, then your infrastructure, your retention policy, all of those things are going to crumble, and your organization will suffer because of it. I love that you brought the stats, Rich. I love the stats. It is true. I mean, high performance comes from people not having to worry about whether or not they will be shut down in a meeting, and or having the ability to speak up, because those are the types of things that we experience when we are excluded. And so inclusion matters, representation matters. Thank you for that. So I would love to jump over into talking more a little bit about sales and how diversity in sales could be a win for all of us, because we know that sales, out of all departments in most companies typically are not the most diverse. It is naturally, and from my experience personally, I'll say my opinion, and maybe others' experiences have been a little bit different, but I've noticed a culture where you bring in your buddy from your last job or the guy you went to college with, and there's a lot of groupthink and they all look alike. And so I'd love to hear from this group, tell me what you think the beauty of, how diversity and winning in sales come together to create something magical. Andreas, would you like to start us off?
Yeah. I love this question because, as much as people think that like sales is mainly like an art, there's a lot of science behind sales, and sales is really a process. The art comes in through your own authenticity, what you bring to the table. And, it's interesting moving into sales. I think I became more of like a organizational psychologist kind of geek, and I geek out a lot on understanding how people make decisions, how organizations make decisions. And in some of the research that I've done, or at least some of the work that I've done, really looking to see, how diversity helps organizations be better. And studies have shown that, by having more diverse perspectives, it allows for that greater creativity because you're getting these different perspectives based on different lived experiences. And to your point around bringing your buddy in from your past job, or when you're interviewing, asking very, very specific questions that, doesn't allow for someone who doesn't fit the mold to really answer well. What it creates is this, it brings in a lot of this affinity bias, right? Like, so we'll start looking people who look like us or who act like us better than, others. And to me, looking at that in sales, the challenge that brings is we've been conditioned as salespeople to make sure that we build that rapport, we find something, that common ground, and get the prospect to hook on that, and that's how we build the relationship. Well, it's kind of like we have to break that a little bit when it comes to building diverse teams. And what I was going to add to that is what it also brings is it gives you the opportunity to understand how others communicate, right? Like, we're becoming much more global, which means the way that we communicate within the US is not the way that we would communicate with folks from across the globe. So understanding that high-low context required within certain communications, or individualistic versus collectivist cultures, to understand whether they win by team or they're focused on competition, it will help teams as they continue to expand, or as companies continue to become more global, communicate with those prospects, with their customers in a much more in a better way, right? In a way that resonates with those individuals.
Absolutely, 100%. I think for me, I've experienced organizations that suppress some metrics. They say that they care about DEI initiatives, but when it's time to talk about recruiting efforts, we talk about who we bring in and how they identify, but we don't talk about or think about the retention portion of that.
Mm-hmm.
And also, like you alluded to, the interview process is not set up in a way that allows diverse candidates to be a part of that pipeline. And so, and this includes even when you have joined an organization, the talent pool and pipeline, the bench that, you establish for career ladders, helping build people up in their careers to be able to step into leadership roles. Those are all lacking, and opportunities, and would be a huge win if more sales leaders put some emphasis and focus on it. Rich, what are your thoughts?
It's a topic that's gonna require, I think, a lot of active participation and change and business partnership, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sales organizations, especially in tech, even ones that I've been part of, always get criticized. It is the bro culture, and it's there. But I think a lot of organizations are trying to change that. And I think the first step a lot of companies did was just to change the gender balance of, male, female. And I think you see more of that, but we're here to talk about taking it a step further. Diversity should include, right, different ways of seeing the world, different mindsets, people along various spectrums of identity. And, the biggest reason for it is, I had a conversation with a peer of mine, another VP of sales, and we were talking about the diversity issue and the challenge of trying to make our sales organizations diverse. And he was a queer sales leader. And I said, what's the biggest, challenge you face? And his words were, well, the biggest thing is I don't have people that, are readily who are queer want to actually apply. I keep getting the same type of people who are applying. And so we got to hire, we have to hire. So, I think the thinking of a lot of sales leaders that it's like a chicken and the egg, like, how do we get more participation in this profession? Right. And I think that's a great question. And it starts with, again, the brand and the culture and what companies are communicating and their active participation, not a month of pride, but like year round branding, year round, focus on it. And so I think the biggest benefit is take any deal cycle that you're in. If you're an enterprise seller, you're a mid-market seller, to some extent, if you have SMB transactional, there's a lot of thinking that goes on. Like when people are trying to close like $100,000, $500,000 deal, what do? They get a lot of people around on a Zoom call and everybody spitballs ideas, and that's built for diversity. That process of creative thinking is built for people who think differently, have different ideas and approaches, challenge a way of doing things, challenge a way a customer thinks or the way your own organization thinks. And the more you can do that, the more you can encourage that, the more you're going to get that by bringing people in and elevating, right? Again, elevating the voices of queer employees and people who have different perspectives. You'd be amazed that if you create that type of open culture, how many people will bring great ideas and accelerate a deal cycle. And you'd be amazed too at how many of our customers appreciate the creative thinking. So I think, diversity has to be an entire fabric of how sales organizations operate. But if you want to really see where the rubber meets the road, it's got to be in your deal processes. It has to encourage creative thinking. And to me, that is the single biggest argument to bring diversity into the sales org, is just to bring in new approaches and to actually encourage, right, active different ways of thinking and making deals happen and approaching customers. I've seen it work, and it's a fantastic approach. And again, it encourages a lot more people to want to participate. And then, hey, maybe we'll get more voices and we'll get more people in the profession, right, who don't look like their buddy that hired them and don't look like the bro and sister culture. I don't know what else to call it, but you know what I mean, right? Instead of having it look so linear, right? Let's just encourage more access and again, more diversity.
And Richard, if you don't mind if I jump in there, Brianna, you brought up a really interesting point that resonated with me, especially in your conversation with, the chicken and the egg, right? Mm-hmm. There's sales sometimes gets a bad rap because when people think of salespeople, what's the first thing that comes to mind? It's like usually like Wolf of Wall Street or the car car salesperson. So, it's one of those things where people it's not necessarily that it's hard to get into the profession. It's just that there's so much, negativity behind, mm-hmm. the profile of someone who is successful or what someone who's successful looks like. And when you can't identify with that, when you see like the top leaders, you can't identify with them, then it doesn't, you don't see yourself getting to that level. Mm-hmm. So why even, try? So while I do think, to your point, like encouraging the diverse thinking, especially, in your deal cycle, mm-hmm. it's also thinking about, how can you share that externally with people so they can see like diverse thought is, accepted here. It's encouraged here. We aren't those wolves of Wall Street. We aren't those used car salespeople.
Great point.
That is a fantastic point and an excellent segue into the next portion of the conversation, where I want to talk about how sales can improve the integration of diverse perspectives, because the excuses that we hear often are, the applications, you mentioned it, Rich, the applications we receive are the applications that we receive. How do we get more creative about the way that we approach our search initiatives or our sourcing or recruitment? Removing that ego, being very intentional, having that top down focus will allow us to prioritize the recruitment and retention of diverse sales professionals. Use your privilege as leaders, right, to uplift others through sponsorship. We don't talk about sponsorship a lot. We talk about mentorship. You can learn some things from people, but sponsorship is that bringing that buddy over to the company. They get those opportunities, but I don't see that happening a lot for queer folks or other identities, right? And use our sponsorship, use our privilege to really uplift others and take them along the journey with you. And that's how we'll start to see change and representation. Educate yourself and check your biases, right? And so from your perspective and the pain points that we've already just spoken about, what can sales do to improve the integration, acceptance, inclusion, and experience of bringing diversity into their organizations? Rich, you go first this time.
Okay. I said earlier in the last question, sales leaders, managers, or anyone who's aspiring to be a leader, it's going to take business partnership. That means there's functions in your company, even if it's small, your founders, your HR department, talent within HR, your ops department, like there are leaders that you partner with. One of the things you have to do as a sales leader is, you're responsible for revenue, but you're also a leader and you're involved in cross-functional groups. And if you're a sales leader and you haven't joined, an affinity group or we call them ERGs, these enterprise resource groups, like you got to go participate. But you got to get the buy-in of your business partners, specifically HR, and you got to tell them what you're trying to do, and you have to engage them, right? Again, I'm going to put some stats out there because I love this stuff, right? 20 years ago, when I started working in sales, less than 15% of companies, the Fortune 500, less than them had a senior leader, meaning a director and above, who identified as some type of queer designation. Okay, less than 15%, somewhere in leadership. Okay, it's 20 years later, it's over 51% now. So there is participation now across companies, at least at the very big, blue chip companies in the U.S. Yet, excuse me, when you look at that statistic is not reflected in sales organizations. But despite industries, excuse me, no matter what industry you look at, that participation looks like it did 20 years ago, right? Queer leadership, queer participation, any of that in sales is sub 15% that identify. And that could just be people who don't want to come out yet. But I think it's a reflection of, again, what sales leaders and revenue leaders are failing to do. They're failing to challenge the status quo and go partner with HR. And an example of that is look at any diversity and inclusion program at any company. Go look at what they did. They did a ton of work. Bravo to HR for getting benefits redone, getting discrimination clauses removed. Bravo to HR for doing that. But if you look really closely, those policies really benefit people who identify as just gay or lesbian. That's it. It doesn't have anything in there for really people who are trans, people who identify as any of the other letters on the spectrum. And so it's hard for them to make the claim for lots of benefits and things that they need. And that's one example. Okay. So guess what? You're a sales leader. You have employees who are asking these questions. Go dig in. Go find out what your D&I policies look like. Go find out what all the resources are for them. Communicate. Make them available. Communicate it again, not just during Pride Month. I just think doing more of that spreads the word and gets people to want to be part of your sales organization, and being active on social media with it and not being afraid, even if you don't identify as queer. Just keep looking at the stats. 1 in 5 Gen Zers, okay, the new workforce, everybody, the 18 to 25 year olds, 1 in 5 identifies as something that is not a traditional identity. That's amazing. So you're going to have sales employees, everybody, who are going to come in from that generation, who are going to need a view of this diversity. And so we've got to start communicating around it. And again, it's not just you, the sales leader. You've got to partner. You got to partner with HR. You got to partner with your leadership. And any organization who doesn't realize these stats is going to fall behind, not just from a talent perspective, but you're just going to fall behind because you're not going to be able to attract the best talent out there. So anyway, I think those are just important things to look at because the demographics are completely changing, right? Brianna, Andres, I mean, you see it all the time. And, sales, I'm going to be the a loud voice. It's a wake up call, sales. Like we have to diversify and we've got to get the discussion and the dialogue going. Like otherwise we're not going to be able to hire out of that pool of Gen Z talent, and we're going to fall behind because our customers are going to look to us and we're going to be archaic.
That's right. I thank you, Rich, for that. We have about 20 minutes left, and I want to give Andreas one quick question. We'll keep it brief so we can allow time for Q&A, but we'll jump to a different question, right? How would you walk away from this, or what advice would you give our audience about creating a brave space for your teams, helping them thrive, being an accomplice and not just an ally for people that have identities that are not, the majority?
Yeah. So, I did want to say one thing about that last question before I jump into this one.
Okay.
Because what Richard said really resonated. I think the one of the key takeaways is sales is going to be left behind. Other organizations, the biggest thing that they're doing right now is really investing and investing in their diverse workforce, and buying centers are becoming more diverse. So sales needs to become more diverse in order to be able to communicate to those buying centers more effectively. So that was the one thing that I wanted to tie in there. And then in terms of what leaders can do, or what the leaders should do, is it really all starts from this concept of psychological safety, right? Giving people the space to be their authentic selves, to take calculated risks, but then also to demonstrate that support when people fail and when people need it, right? And I usually feel like, or what I've seen a lot is it's a lot of lip service, right? Like we are, we care about you. We want to make sure that you thrive. But at the end of the day, your metrics are what matter. And then it becomes a push to meet your metrics, or to meet your goals, or to meet your quotas. And where they tend to fall is in that level of support, really leaning in and supporting people so that they can bring their true selves to work. They can be more creative. They can take those calculated risks. So I think that that's one piece. The second piece is holding people accountable, right? As leaders, we can't just say that we're going to do something. We not only have to hold our team accountable, but we have to hold ourselves accountable. One of the things that whenever people ask me for support on like DE&I efforts, one of the first things I always do is like, have you learned how to pronounce everyone's names correctly? Because the name is what people's names are what they associate with their identity. And it's incredibly humbling when a leader who's been working with someone for 3 or 4 years learns how to pronounce someone's name, and the reaction that person has the first time they hear their name pronounced correctly. That's right. And so if there's one takeaway, if you have a diverse workforce, if you gave someone a nickname because you couldn't pronounce their name, learn to pronounce their name at the very least. Show them that they're seen, show them that they matter, and that their identity matters, and how they identify themselves matters. So I would say that would be like if you could do nothing else, walk away with nothing else, do that.
Absolutely. And that's exactly where we were going. Our key takeaways from this conversation. It was such a great conversation. There was so much more that we could have talked about, but I want to hear from each of you those key takeaways about how we can level up in the sales in the sales departments within our workforce, within tech, within any industry actually, and how you want people to walk away from this conversation with more knowledge, more ability to be an accomplice as a peer and as a leader, and then we can narrow it down there. Let's start with you, Rich.
Well, the concept of allyship and helping, right? There's probably very few people on this call who don't have a friend or know someone or a relative who is queer. It's unlikely. Most of us do. And as I mentioned with like the Gen Z stat, right? Like it's very common in this generation entering the workforce. And I think that one of the takeaways I have for people is when it comes to allyship is, don't be afraid to find out what your own companies are doing, right? From a diversity standpoint. If you don't know what the diversity and inclusion initiatives are, go find out. And go find out what the statistics are and what the goals are in your talent function for recruiting. Go find out. Go ask. It doesn't hurt. It's normal to ask these questions. And if you see statistics that are alarming or don't quite fit what you think your company should aspire to do, challenge it, right? Be tactful, enlist your leadership and ask questions and try to drive it. And if you are a leader and you're in that position, go figure out where you're at and what the goals are and how to go drive those initiatives and goals. I don't think it's something that's ever, something people should rest upon, but that's where you can participate. That's where you can be an ally. And if you're in a company that doesn't have an ERG, an enterprise resource group, doesn't have a community, even in just a small Slack channel for people who are queer, ask why,
Yeah.
right? And go find these things out. That is allyship. That is standing up for more than just someone that who's different and who's queer. That's actually taking a position and a stance of leadership to create a better culture for anyone who's different, frankly, right?
Yeah.
And so I think the call to action for anybody here who's not queer is to go find out what your company's doing and where can you partner, and go ask good, deep, impactful questions about what the company's goals and objectives are. And like Eduardo's comments, right? How do we distinguish between activism and just kind of rainbow washing? It's this. Just because your company changes their logo to a rainbow background, what else have they done? What else have they done to actually support the community, to support their own employees? And these are questions worth asking today. And as leaders, if we don't engage in this dialogue, we can set every effort back. Pride isn't just about a celebration. It's actually, like you said at the beginning, Brianna, it's a moment to revere and to memorialize like what people have had to do in the past for anybody who is different, for anybody who, faced, what it was like, right, in this country and anywhere around the world, like 50, 60 years ago. So there's more we can do. Not everybody has to like be a staunch activist. There's small things you can do for allyship, and you should start with your own organizations and go find out, what more can be done, right, to be a part of, right, all the changes that are happening in the world around us.
Absolutely. I just saw another question come in that kind of piggybacks off of what you just said. How do you not become that tokenized queer person that everybody looks to establish the LGBTQ plus Slack group or ERG or what have you?
Mm-hmm.
And so I'd love to hear your take on that, Andres.
Yeah, so that is a really interesting question. And why I say it's interesting is, there's this idea of like being the token person. Also, there's this on the other side, there's a sense of being the like only person, right? Like there's this sense of onlyness. So it's like not just loneliness, but onlyness. And I think it really starts with understanding what is the goal of your diversity initiative or whatever it is that you are trying to do to build a more diverse workforce. If it's just to get people in and have them figure it out, then that is not leadership, right? That is all you're doing is just hitting a number and then hoping for the best. And hope is not a strategy. So it is really important for leaders to go in and understand, well, what is my goal here? What is the goal that I'm trying to achieve for my team? How does this align to our team's purpose, to our team's mission? How is this going to create a vision for us? And I think taking that step back and understanding the why you're doing something can help prevent, folks from feeling tokenized or from being just a metric, being just a number. I think for both, leaders and professionals or individual contributors, I've been starting to use the acronym of like working with care, right? And you work with curiosity, authenticity, resiliency, and empathy, right?
Yes.
That curiosity of understanding the thing behind the thing, the why, authenticity of who you are, bringing who you are into what you do, the idea of resiliency, not only the resiliency of the work that in the work that you're doing, but resiliency in terms of how you show up every day and how you help support others. And then the empathy, not just empathy for others, but empathy for yourself. Leaders who are allies, realizing that they're not going to make the right decision every time, but learning from those wrong decisions, I think will help them make decisions in the first place, right? And not make decisions out of necessity, but more out of care.
That's right. I agree. And empathy is such a huge word that I think sales needs more of. We're not very empathetic. We're not empathetic enough. And from an organizational perspective, defining performative actions because you feel like it, like those logos in June that turn into a rainbow, or a write-up from someone that is in your organization that identifies it as queer, to the intentional version of that also thinks about ERGs and other resources to support inclusion, like having a speaker come and visit and talk about the history of Pride, having, conversations like this internal to your organization. It creates awareness and it creates advocacy and accomplices when situations might arise. And so I think that that's very important as well. We are down to the wire. I don't think I've seen any more questions come in. Your final takeaways, Andreas, if you have any more. You gave us one, but are there any others?
Yeah, so I think one takeaway that I think is important is that what got us here isn't going to get us there, right? Like the process of sales, right? Like as I mentioned earlier, is really built on psychology and really helping persuade people and get them to build relationships quickly. And a lot of that has, cause us to create these cognitive biases, these shortcuts, in order for us to create these relationships as quickly as possible. And for leaders to truly embrace diversity and for leaders to truly bring in diverse talents, sometimes you have to take a step back and acknowledge that those biases that help you in sales may not help you bring in the best talent. And really, being cognizant of that when it comes to interviewing, when it comes to sourcing talent, and then when it comes to retaining that talent. Right? Not everyone's going to be motivated just by money. This next generation of workers are more focused, are more mission driven, are more purpose driven. And if you're at the end of the day, all you're doing is saying, just meet quota so you can make your bonus, that's not going to create a fulfilling career for many people now. So really thinking through what are the biases that got me to where I am and how do I set those aside so I can bring up the next generation of leaders.
Awesome. Thank you, Andrea. So we'll welcome Eduardo back to the stage and wait for him to get here and wrap things up.
Yeah, can you hear me? All right.
Yes, we can.
Before I wrap it up, Brianna, can you give us your takeaway?
Yeah, I think that for the folks that have joined us today, the audience that are identifying as non-queer, step up. If you see something, say something. Be a supportive. Educate yourself. Be mindful of the questions that you ask. Are they truly appropriate? Take a little bit of time out to learn something new about the history of this community of the Pride community, and also, if you are in a position where you have privilege to do so and you have authority in your organization, find a way to support others that need the support, that need the helping hand. Pull them up, uplift them. Everybody's climbing this ladder, we're climbing, but are we looking back and lending a hand to the person behind us? And is that person behind us, fitting into our sort of underrepresented group, marginalized group? That's one of my key takeaways. The other thing is organizations, leaders of companies, not just sales groups, leaders of companies, step forward into your organization with culture at the top of your mind. Yes, you have to build a product, you have to sell it, you have to have a go-to-market function that works, you have to have a product that works, you have to have clients and ARR and all of these metrics that you need to meet from investor and everybody wants to be a unicorn perspective, but you won't be able to do that without a diverse workforce. Make sure you prioritize it, and do that by making sure that your recruiters and your HR gets it, and they know that you cannot only rely on the applications that have come in. You have to go out to source folks. There are groups, I think we shared some of them, that people are a part of that are out in technology, right? And they are looking for positions, they are looking for roles. There are pipeline and candidates and places to find them. You have to get creative, and you have to go out there and headhunt. Be creative, build a culturally diverse workforce, and see your business thrive.
Awesome. I hate to wrap things up right here because I learned so much. You guys are so knowledgeable, and I just moved to a job in marketing and sales. And as a queer person, it was so hard to find the four panelists to be here today, and it made me think: is that where I want to be? And yes, this is where I want to be. Thank you so much for all your knowledge and for everything that you share here today. And thank you for the audience to join us today and to stay to the end. We love the questions and the participation in the chat. You're going to receive a follow-up email, and possibly the recording will be available on our website. We're going to discuss that. And thank you again, panelists, for joining us today. We are going to hang out backstage while the MSP team makes sure the audience will receive everything, all the materials, all the knowledge that we discussed here today in their email. And I hope to see you here next time. Stay safe out there. Stay proud of yourself, and be loud and proud and queer and out, and just celebrate who you are. So, panelists, let's hang out backstage.
Thank
I'll see
you.
you later. Thank you,
Thanks,
everyone.
everyone.